So this week we are covering three major chapters again, and what I'd like you to do is that since I am sensing a serious burnout phase by many of my students, um, it's irrelevant to me that we all committed to do a cram course. Ultimately, a lot of you that are going to keep up with the work are going to be so burned out you'll forget much of the material. And what's important to me is that I feel like because this is such an important, I think all history is important, but it's crucial that you understand much of what we're covering. That and we are coming to the end of this cram course series. A section. Um, Boy, I can't even articulate myself right now. The bottom line is that I want you guys to get as much out of this material as possible. I'm going to be sending you mainly documentaries right now and some videos because, frankly, as I go into this, I can't help but cover a lot of things, and I think it's gonna not be it's not gonna stick, and the footage is really important because the one thing that I can say that also justify even more so the use of documentary clips as we get into modern U.S. history, we see history being televised for the first time. And something that I think that's lost on a lot of Americans is one of the things that made many American citizens turn against the war in Vietnam was watching a war on TV. Something that we don't even do now anymore, and it's not a coincidence, okay? You literally had Americans, and I remember I've talked to a lot of Americans about this, that would come home from working all day, get on the news, and watch American soldiers shooting Vietnamese people, and sometimes being shot at. And it's kind of almost like, maybe imagine every night coming home from work and the news shows continuous footage of animals being slaughtered in slaughterhouses, and saying, here's your Oscar Mayer wieners that you're putting on with the macaroni and cheese, and here's a good look at how you got that. Um, those kind of scenes do make a lot of people vegetarians or vegans or animal rights activists. Others not so much. But we know that most people would like to think their food doesn't have a face, right? And they don't want to be reminded, or they don't want to think about it, or they're very content if it just says happy cow. All right, it was happy. Okay, it's happy. Nothing bad happened. It's just, here it is. So we talk about war like, oh, okay, well, soldiers go fight wars, and in America in particular, because we never, other than the Civil War and the war against the British, most of our wars, everybody at the time in living memory had no recollection of having bombs dropped on their own country, or what that feels like. And we were told communists were bad, and democracy is good, and we're on the good side, and it's very straightforward. And then you watch a news clip of a U.S. soldier taking a flamethrower and torching a village hut, and you see babies crying and little children running in the streets afraid for their lives. And Americans were shocked. And many did turn on soldiers, U.S. soldiers coming back, saw them in a negative light. I think for many who had family and loved ones there, it also horrified them. Not just, knowing that in this battle zone that your loved one could die right on television, So the televised aspect of the war is something completely unique to history. Okay, they had like footage, maybe like in movie theaters or something for World War I and World War II, but not like a nightly newscast. And then later we start seeing segregation You can watch TV, of police officers and supposedly respectable white citizens attacking black children, putting dogs on them, attacking them with fire, putting fire hoses on them for the sin of wanting to drink the same drinking fountain as a white person, or sit in the diner, as white people, or to mix between white and black. And so the nation, I think, started to see itself and its own actions, and to have a very turbulent set of reactions to all these things. Okay. And so this was really significant. And I want to point out, since the Gulf War, the United States started using embedded journalists. I might discuss this just before this class ends, or as we go over the Gulf War. I just want you to think about this. How much footage have you seen on the news in all these years we've been fighting, for all these years, having all these battles in the Middle East? How much have you seen of what goes on other than some YouTube clips that you may or may not want to watch? You don't. And it's not a coincidence. And some people think that that's for the better, and some people think that it's merely that the U.S. knows that they can't, that our politicians can't continue a war where we're going to see it, because then it creates a question about it, right? And in the case with Iraq is the same as with Vietnam. The Vietnamese did not attack the United States. So, I mean, that's what's kind of also, I think, something that we can't lose sight of, which is controversial. And again, so many of my students have loved ones that died and suffered from the Vietnam War. Many of my students some of my older students could even be Vietnam War vets. And so, just like this is a very, very sensitive topic that I feel like really compelled to show sensitivity towards. But I also think that rightfully we have been, as a nation, really disturbed by the way that vets were treated during this time. That we've also, though, forgot about what this meant to the Vietnamese. I mean, we lost a lot of U.S. troops, and many suffered. But the amount of death and destruction that happened to Vietnam, and then by extension Cambodia and Laos, was astronomical. Astronomical. And I think that one of the things that has been kind of lost on this is that we should always point out is the reason why we lost. In my opinion, now this is my opinion, we would not have been able to win in the sense that what the U.S. was hoping to accomplish, for this reason. Not because our troops were not tough, strong, disciplined, and determined, but because the Vietnamese were fighting for their own country. And many historians have pointed out that the biggest miscalculation that U.S. policymakers had with the Vietnam War was they thought they were fighting communists. They thought this was a battle of ideologies. But it was really a battle of nationalisms. And this is well documented now. The majority of Vietnamese were fighting the Chinese for centuries. They fought the French during World War II. They fought off the Japanese. Then they fought off the French again, that we supported. We supported the French to try to reoccupy them. And it was the Soviet Union and the communists that were giving them aid for their independence, because the French and the United States, the Western nations, were actually supporting their suppression of their independence. I mean, it was a French colony. And so they went to the avenues that they had available, and they were able to fight off with such determination for so long, because, again, they were full-on patriots. And the reason why that the South, the government that we supported, was doing so terribly is it just didn't have patriotic cred with the general population at the time. Okay? Now, many Vietnamese that are here in the United States were refugees from that war that were hardcore against the communists and they have that one narrative. But if you watch a lot of documentaries and you do research, there were even some very wealthy, high up Vietnamese that were in the southern government that the U.S. was supporting to fight off the communists, and they were actually spies for the communists. And they were really against their own interests because communism was going to overthrow wealth in the way that they had it. And when they were interviewed of why they did that, they said that they were basically embarrassed to work for the South, to see that Ho Chi Minh and the North Vietnamese were really seeming to have a battle in which for a common Vietnamese person seemed like legitimate nationalist fighting a foreign invader. And the southern side just looked like you were collaborating with foreigners to protect your own self-interests. It made them, I think, many of them feel very treacherous to their own nation. Okay. And so again, this was something that was a point being missed by our policymakers because they were very, very focused on the the ideologies of the Cold War, which is seeing everything through this lens that is as if every person who was a communist or that the communists were just sitting there reading Karl Marx and Lenin and Stalin all day, and that there was no other ulterior motives for what they were doing. And then in the middle of this, there was an irony that we were talking about fighting for the free world at a time where we had legal segregation in the South, and that police were used to terrorize black people and from having equal going into diners in the South. And so on the news, you're watching U.S. soldiers fighting Vietnamese people fighting for what many people see in the world as a freedom of independence, while we're squashing our own minorities at home. You can imagine just the gut-wrenching cultural strains that were taking place. I mean, we're already seeing this now, right? The whole battle now over Trump, whatever we think of him, is we have the United States not being very united right now, having a lot of turbulence. And I think that we see in this era just a tremendous amount. It's very gut-wrenching. And for U.S. patriots, the idea of protecting the free world was to stop communism wherever it came up. That was the real concern. And the viewpoint was that even though Vietnam didn't attack us, that you had to, for the sake of the free world, there was a fear of that domino effect. Okay, so that was the one side of it. And, the South, we have to remember that in the U.S. Civil War, we ended slavery. We never addressed the issue of racism, and we never really came to terms with that. And we had those kind of issues taking place. And then within the African American movement, as these things were going on, Native Americans started, fighting for more of their rights. So women, we just have, you look in these 3 chapters, and there's so much important things that were to go over that are still much a part of our cultural strife that we have with ourselves in the United States right now. Okay, and I wish that we could really go on and on about this more and go in better detail. And I like doing this, especially in a classroom setting. But what I'm going to do from this point on is I'm going to post documentaries on dealing with some of the subjects that are covered in our textbooks. I want you to still look over the chapters as much as you can. And then, I hope the documentaries will help give you some visualizations of important key events that are discussed in these next 3 chapters.